All right, you ready?
Let's roll.
All right, guys. Welcome back to Opinionated Collective Sports Talk. It's been about a month, and we've had a crazy college football season so far this year, which also includes Alabama dropping out of the top 25 for the first time in how many years?
Oh, who knows?
I mean, that one, and who's the other team that just dropped out of the top 25?
Uh, Good question. Is it Georgia? No, that's not Georgia.
So hold on. It looks like score schedule rankings. I'm on ESPN.com, so we're going to check up on that. Okay, so first thing we're going to review today is literally going to be the top 25 rankings. As you mentioned to me yesterday, Oregon is still number one, but Alabama losing yesterday and Ole Miss knocked them out of the top 10, and now they're both consecutively 13 and 15, and these were top 10 ranked teams, which is very interesting.
Well,
Ohio State and
when
Texas are both 10 and 1. I'm a little surprised with Texas being in the top 10, especially coming
I'm
over
not.
from the Big 12 conference.
Oh, no, no, I'm not. I'm not
You
surprised at all.
you think it's because they're new to the conference that they're able to do this?
No, I think they just became a solid team. They're doing pretty well.
The big thing with them is they've had a partial quarterback controversy, for part of the year because they have two quarterbacks. They have a Manning and Quinn Ewers, which I thought was really interesting this season to have to upplay or downplay because the fans want to look at Arch Manning, and they're 10 and 1 right now with the other quarterback Ewers. But anyway,
Oh, well.
we'll unbuckle a little more of the top 25 later, but I figure the first article we'll focus on is basically Coach Prime's son. Interestingly enough, we all love to hate Coach Prime or Coach Deion Sanders. I mean, I remember watching this guy in the 1990s leave college football from Florida State and then play in the NFL and create an oddly interesting brand for himself. And now, and then he spent the 2000s and a couple of years of the start of the 2010s as a broadcaster for every major sports network, which eventually got him into coaching because, let's be honest, he wanted to coach his son. But this was oddly interesting because during his first coaching stint at what was the HBCU he coached at
Jacksonville State.
Jacksonville State. He recruited his son, he recruited Travis Hunter, and he recruited his other son in the second year. Now, all four men left Jacksonville State because Deion wanted to coach Division One, so Deion ended up at Colorado. They had a bad season last year, leaving the Pac-12, and now for whatever reason, if I'm looking at the rankings correctly, they're 8-3 this year, which is but they're in the Big 12.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So the interesting thing with this is, okay, sports host Pat McAfee is already theorizing about which franchise might the star quarterback land at, but at the same time, Mr. Sanders, unfortunately, is banned from playing for more NFL teams and will have a hard time finding a good future. It's not that I think the kid is talented. It's from just watching him in a dozen games and some highlights. He's not really an NFL quarterback. I mean, from what you've watched, what do you think? Do you think he could be a successful quarterback in the NFL, or do you think Daddy's name will just carry him?
Yeah, I mean, based on what I've seen, he has some potential. But again, it's one of those, he is Sanders' son. And unfortunately, or
The
I should
name
say, fortunately for him, due to the controversies surrounding him, and the fact that he has made some poor choices in general.
Give example of what poor choices you thought were bad for him. So do you think it for being too athletic or just being a knucklehead?
Mainly just for being a knucklehead, pretty much, and just like I think the most recent thing I recall is he kind of gave the ref a bit of a pushy, and he's kind of lucky that that wasn't called. But I mean, I think he thinks he has something, but he's, in my opinion, just kind of average at best. I mean, he's not really that spectacular, in my opinion. So, I mean, if he went to a real team and not the Colorado Buffaloes, he'll probably be eaten alive. Like he wouldn't survive.
So basically, you couldn't see him starting in another. You couldn't see him starting for another college in another conference. It's kind of he needs data,
Not really.
basically.
I mean, he needs some discipline. He needs to understand that it's not about him. It's not about being anything except, hey, you are part of a system, you run the system, and you go home.
Now that's very interesting because, quite honestly, I don't think, from what I've watched, and I've watched a good amount of highlights with him. First off, he would fit into the too mobile. And when you go to the NFL right now, especially, the two teams who would potentially want him aren't cut out to develop a quarterback right now. So the problem with him is likely he's going to take nil money and sit out a year. But if you sit out a year of football, we haven't seen this do well before because they'll just be out of shape if they're not constantly playing football.
Right. So it's kind of like you
That's
take the
where you're
money and you
that's
sit
where
on your
you're
ass, or you don't take the money and you get developed into possibly a legend. You never know. And in this is why I say, no money's okay, but please don't pay them like pros.
don't pay them what?
Don't pay them like pros.
Well,
I mean,
no,
come on.
I mean,
No.
pro contracts are not guaranteed to begin with.
Well,
That's
yeah,
the
but that's irrelevant. What guarantees are irrelevant. The whole point is if you're paying them so much money to begin with, then they kind of lose that incentive to A, stay where they are, and B, actually give a care. Um, and I feel like that's kind of the situation in football right now is you get some people going after the money, and I think that's hurting their chances. Like DJ, you're gonna. I don't understand why he's getting any money. He ain't that good. um, and yes, he wins games, but he also loses games. So, hey,
I mean, especially at this point with no guarantees of making it into the pro leagues, you kind of can't blame them for wanting to take these big paydays. That was the whole thing with the name, image, and likeness controversy. You had coaches, for example, along the lines of Ryan Day, and actually, no, not Ryan Day. Some of the older school coaches like Nick Saban, who
mhm.
effectively liked the old way of doing things, where players had to get money under the table, in a degree. We knew they were probably getting paid on some reason. For whatever reason when they
Well,
would
yeah,
commit
I
to
mean, he
certain
kind of
schools, but it
let
wasn't out
them
in the
get their
open
degrees.
until
Yeah.
wasn't out until the open until you had enough court cases go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they just finally said, you know what? I think these players should be able to get paid or,
Yeah.
test the markets.
Sure, I mean, they should get paid something. I mean, I'm not saying don't pay them, but
Well, you looked
honestly, if
at
they're
it
getting
as the
educate, if they're getting education and they're getting paid a stipend enough to cover, their housing and other expenses and maybe a little bit of pocket money, sure, no problem. But paying them millions, hundreds of thousands, and millions of dollars, and I'm like, that's a little absurd in my opinion. But that's just me.
you're looking at it as absurd, but in reality, if you're having let's go back and look at some of the bigger names who ended up in the NFL. I'm not going to use the name Tom Brady. I'm going to use some more recent examples.
Okay.
You had a top selling jersey, for example, depending on what college you were at, like Matt Leinert's number 11 back
Sure.
at USC. I
Sure.
guarantee you that jersey was a top seller for the USC program or Reggie
Right.
Bush. They saw
Okay.
probably no money off those jersey sales. Where,
Okay, that's fine. I mean, give a portion of those sales. That's not what I'm arguing against. It's more of, okay, how high are we going to go with this? Because there should be some kind of a limit. If they're making, at some point it should be like, okay, is it 100,000, a $250,000? I mean, what's that limit? Because it shouldn't be millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. Because at some point, it is just like the NFL. You can just go wherever who throws you the most money. Isn't that what the NFL really is about at that point?
well, the
I mean, I'm just making
you
a
can make that argument with the NFL, but I will counter this. So what used to happen was, for example, you got Tom Brady to take less money, but that's also because Tom Brady had a funny situation where the team around him was always good and competitive, so he could take less money, and his former wife, you know, at one point was making more money than him. So you had that as an example. But
But
most
how is
other
that relevant
players,
though?
they wanted a top five contract. They, every year you would have two players or one player who would set the market rate, and then that player set for the following season the rate of what the position should be paid. So it's money depending on the individual situation, but most of these players probably wouldn't also mind taking a little less money to be on a championship caliber team where the team is
Sure, sure.
consistently, competing in the playoffs. Now,
Yeah, okay. That's
take that
that's
over to college
okay.
football. I'm sure Bush and Leinart didn't whine about it because USC had a good coach. They were getting top 25 classes.
Okay.
And, then, they were consistently competing for the BCS.
Okay.
So some schools, depending on that situation, you could get away with it. So the next one that I think would be worth discussing is week 8, which was like which was a month ago, right?
Oh, let's look at week 8, shall we?
Week
What?
8, you already had two college football coaches who got fired, and
Yeah.
basically neither
Oh,
of them was Mike Norvell at Florida Wa State.
that's amazing how he's still surviving.
I mean, what was it that you said? You said it was the way his contract was structured after they went undefeated last year.
Yeah, like
I understand why you
it's
wanted to pay the coach for recruiting purposes, but I kind of feel like at the same time they
where the
screwed that up
results
completely this year because
between the portal and the contract, like it's like either you keep him and you pay his salary, or you let him go and you pay his salary anyway, but on an accelerated rate. So
some of these schools are probably like NFL teams. You don't want to pay a coach to sit, but the coach is like, I don't care as long as I get paid.
that too, that happens often, and yeah, it's one of those things. It's like Florida State is in a tough spot because I mean, they did really well the year prior, and they just got snubbed. It's unfortunate, but then they decided they're gonna have this revenge tour, hire one of the quote unquote best guys in the business, got some of the quote unquote better players through the transfer portal. And so between the nil of DJ Ugarte and the contract for Novell, man, Florida State's just hurting really bad this year. And then you just have these odd, I mean, some of these losses are legit losses, but some of them are just like, how did they lose?
Well, like the first game of the season,
Oh,
the
please, that
Georgia
Georgia Tech game.
that Georgia Tech game is
Wow,
amusing to watch
that
every
was
single time.
that was a shot heard around the world. And from that point on, Florida State just went, oh my gosh, please don't tell us. And look where we are now.
I mean,
Florida State is,
ECU even fired their head coach Mike Houston with already at the 3 and 4 point of the season. This
mm-hmm,
that was one of the first firings to be seen, which was interesting because I guess now college football is like, oh, you have to consistently be competing. I mean, the
yeah,
question I would ask this year is, okay, Alabama's 8-3, right?
yeah.
Do you think this coach will be given a chance next year, even though they won 8 games but they had 3 losses? Or are the fans going to go wah because he's not Nick Saban?
That remains to be seen.
This is the problem with somebody legendary like that in Nick Saban. You could fire the
Yeah,
coach, but the next guy is going to have to live up to the same expectations.
right.
So let's do ourselves a favor to all the people in Alabama. Instead of going,
Adjust your expectations
thank
downward.
you. Thank you.
Lower your
Thank you. Thank you.
expectations.
This is not Nick Saban. He will
No,
not be
he's
Nick
not.
Saban.
He
Let
cannot.
him build his identity. Stop trying to make him Nick Saban. He will never be Nick Saban. He wants to be
Sorry.
himself.
Lamb himself is now his program. Nick Saban may be an advisor, but it still is not Nick Saban's program anymore.
Saban is the boomers generation of Paul Bear Bryant, who was basically one of the most legendary Alabama coaches. I think now at this point, you could make the argument that Saban has initially replaced the legend of Bear Bryant. Saban carved out his own legacy by, going to multiple BCS championships and multiple BCS playoffs, multiple bowls.
Hmm.
The team was competitive for 14 years. He
Yeah.
didn't have one initially bad season, and even his bad seasons were like 3 losses. But you're expecting a coach who just came over from a 12-1 Washington team to be Nick Saban. God, you fans are just like literally making us want to hit our heads against the wall.
Oh. But you know what? You know, they say self-fulfilling expectations are a bitch.
Oh, of course.
I mean, that I think this is the number one problem with any sort of coaching change or player change. We all expect our own teams to be great, or in some cases worse, or the same at least. What's
So,
worse than change? Then what's worse than no change? Change, unexpected change.
because speaking of change, I mean, as you mentioned, the buyouts for both these coaches, Norval,
Big,
Callan DeBoer. I mean,
big.
you already want to talk about buying out Callan DeBoer? Really? At 70 million just because in one season he's 8-3.
I mean, what I mean, at that, I mean, if you're paying that kind of money, milk his ass.
This
Milk
one
him.
is a little more interesting. 63 million for Norville, but given the season, I could understand floating the idea around.
I say give him a couple more seasons and see how he does.
Yeah, because this I mean, you have to really look at this season and say they lost all their players to the NFL or the transfer portal. How can you judge them on that?
Yep, and plus it's a brand new coach. Let's be real, folks.
And they were trying to get into a more competitive conference by going WA.
Mm,
Now, even funnier, they're talking about I don't let's see what Oklahoma's record is what right now. Oh, they're not even ranked. And they're already
no,
talking about buying out Venables. Interesting. That buyout
yes.
is 44 million. Lincoln,
Reasonable.
I can understand this one. USC's Lincoln Riley. I never thought this guy was a smart hire for that school to begin with because, all right, here's a funny thing, not necessarily him. You see a lot of coaches these days coming up at big brand name schools, whereas when you go back and look at Pete Carroll and Saban, nobody in that generation or the generation after Gen X, nobody started at big brand name schools like this. They had to
No.
come up through the ranks at, lower tier schools. Even somebody like Lane Kiffin, who consistently jumped around the SEC. I mean, Kiffin worked with Carroll at USC. Then he got hired to the Raiders. After the Raiders didn't work out, he rejuvenated himself at Alabama under Saban during the 14-year reign. Then he gets hired at a lower tier Central Florida school. And after that, he comes back to the SEC at Ole Miss, where he is currently. That's kind
Hmm.
of a little more understandable than Lincoln Riley basically being the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. He developed 4 quality quarterbacks and gets hired at USC, but they can't produce a defense.
Hmm.
And even funnier, USC went wah just so they could get into a much more superior conference. And now I understand why you would actually want to buy him out at 88 million this year, because not only did you change conferences and go wah just for a little more money, because everybody loves to go wah today, but you're not even good in this conference.
Huh.
You have to fly from Los Angeles all the way
Usually you're
into the
not good in
Midwest.
in a new conference. Unless
But
you're Oregon or Texas, then I guess you can do whatever the fuck you want.
yeah, but we're looking at USC going into basically a Midwestern conference where they have no affiliation whatsoever. Yeah, you wanted to play in a better conference for more money, but that doesn't mean that the conference is good is the right fit for you.
That's right.
And obviously, we're both looking at this right now and we're saying, you guys are fucking morons. Excuse my language. You wanted the Big 12. No, you wanted the Big 10, which has frigging Michigan, Ohio State, people who don't play football on a beach.
Yeah.
You can't make
People
this.
who will take you to Pound Town the minute they see you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, because it make sense, or the math
Like
isn't
I
mathing.
and but then you got Oregon.
I
But
can
then again, I kind of wonder
I
about Oregon
understand
sometimes.
Oregon. Oregon went to which conference? Remind me.
They went to the Big Ten. They're Big Ten
Oregon
now.
has a good team.
Well,
They
that's true too. I will say
Oregon,
this:
I can
Oregon
understand
beats
Oregon wanting to
ass.
play with the big boys because they've proved they
They
can
beat
play with the
ass.
big boys. They've been consistently good in the Pac 12.
They effectively beat ass and took names. Yeah,
Yes, they beat ass, they take names, they wax the booty.
they sure do. They definitely waxed Oregon State's booty almost every time.
Oh yeah, now you can't even call your rivalry game the Civil War anymore because it's not politically correct.
Fuck. Fuck you, Oregon. In a good way, though.
Yes, exactly. All right, now the
Speaking of which, Oregon State won the Pac-12 last night.
you mean the Pac one?
No, that's just the Pac-2. But yeah, no, haha, with all jokes aside. It's still the Pac-12 legally, so yes, they
It's
have
legally
that
the
crown.
Pac-12 until everybody leaves, which they did leave because they all wanted to be in super conferences.
Sure. But hey, we beat Washington State.
Yes, you did. Now, for the interesting part of the episode today, we are now going to discuss a little more in depth Alabama and Ole Miss falling out of the top 10 for the first time. I'm sorry, I can't let this go because I don't know whether to say, is it funny? Is it funny, haha? Is it funny because it's a new coach? Or it's funny because they were consistently good for 14 years and now they're like 8-3 is
Oh,
supposedly a bad
yeah.
season, but it's not a bad season.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at these rankings, for example, with Oregon being 11-0 and not losing, you now have 1, 2, 3, 4, including Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas, and Ohio State are all sitting at 10-1. Georgia and Tennessee are sitting at 9-2. Miami, SMU, who's finally ranked for like how long? Indiana and Boise State are all 10-1.
And let's do a side quest with Indiana. I know they lost to Ohio State, yeah, last night. But
They
let's get real. Despite that, Indiana just taking the top 10 spot in an odd sort of way gives me a warm fuzzy glow.
Hey, I'm impressed because what this college football season is actually turning into finally is basically with this new playoff format, which we didn't
Everyone's out for
expect.
blood, man.
Exactly, because now basically there's no more assured Alabama's going to be going to the playoffs or Michigan's going to be going to the playoffs
Nope.
or the bowl season like they always are. It's basically of all teams, even in the SEC, Vanderbilt, the historic
Man,
bitch of the SEC,
Vandy.
is
I
now
mean, I
actually
don't care
respectable.
what anybody says. I don't care if they lose every game or they don't make it to a bowl game. Vanderbilt is a hero for college football.
For winning against which team?
Just for giving Bama a loss. They're a hero for college football.
Do you hate Alabama that much?
I don't hate them at all. I just think it's absolutely freaking hilarious
No,
that
I
someone
think what
like
it more
Vandy
is, I think what it
somehow
more,
gets the upper hand on Alabama.
I
But
think
it's
what
a great story. It's just great.
I think what it is because we're finally seeing that it's not just athletes and coaching, it's that the format is finally helping other teams become respectable now. Like looking at Indiana in the top 10,
Yeah.
looking at Vandy, who was everybody's whatchamacallit.
Yeah. But let's give some love to Arizona State. One that below Bama with a
Nine and
better
two.
record with 92. How does that happen? Even the Gamecocks are doing well.
I th-
Army cracking the top 25.
did
Iowa
remind me. Did
State.
Army lost last night to Notre Dame? Correct.
Yes, they did.
I have to say something in respect to Army since they're from since it's West Point and it's right next door to me. It's actually nice to see one of the service academy that's been the longest joke in college football where everyone beat up on. It's actually nice to see them finally have a respectable season.
Agreed. And actually, in the coaches poll, Army is like number 22. Hey, look at that. Shit.
Exactly.
Hey,
They are ranked 25 in this week's rankings. Because after that, after Indiana goes Boise State, Clemson, Alabama, Arizona State, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Iowa State, Tulane, BYU, Texas A&M, UNLV, Illinois, Colorado, Missouri, and Army.
hey,
I mean, since these teams are all top 25, these are going to be all the teams getting bowl bids pretty soon. So, it's going to be a new
it's
impressive
gonna be a
playoff and
fun
bowl
bowl
season.
season.
Oh yeah, and plus you got what is it next week the this upcoming weekend, don't we, since we know we're going to be back one more time with this next month, and we'll have to figure that out. We're gonna review this. We're gonna come back in January for the playoffs because there's gonna be this is the best fucking time of the year,
This is great.
especially
Great
Michigan
for
and
college
Ohio.
football.
Now, here's my question. Speaking of,
Mm,
since next weekend will be the Ohio State Michigan game,
yes, it will
who do you
be.
think is going to win?
Shit. I mean, you know, man, I'm a Michigan fan. I don't care about Ohio State.
I got to go with Michigan too, only because I'm kind of tired of the Ohio State Suckeyes always winning. They're like literally the most boring team ever. I mean, let's
Yeah, I
even look
mean,
at
there's
this
only
for
one team
example.
worse than they are. We all know who they are.
Michigan State.
No, actually, I like Michigan State and the Thundering Herd.
No, no, no. You call them the Thundering Turd.
That's what you said.
You know what? Quiet you. I mean, I'm just gonna give you a little glimpse of this. This was a month ago from the Oregon Ohio State game. Ryan Day decided to go wah because his team lost. Wah
Oh,
wah
yes, I
wah.
know. I hope Oregon and Ohio State play again and Oregon just beats the shit out of them.
Well, because you just can't make this up.
No, you really can't. Then
You
again, you
can't.
can't
I
make
get
up the
it.
fact that Marshall player.
It's convenient for every college football player or coach to go wah nowadays. Because did we really see this 10, 15 years ago
Oh
where
man,
everybody
you
went
should have
wah?
seen the quarterback of was it Dart from Ole Miss
Jackson
after.
Dart.
Oh man, he cried after that game. Actually, he was crying. I mean, he had a meltdown.
Some people have actually been saying that Gen Z now, as football players, don't show the same emotion or, the same emotion or drive to play football as past generations, which is interesting.
I can see that, especially with Dart's breakdown due to his own two super shitty poor decisions.
Like, I'll give you an
Like triple
example.
coverage into the Florida secondary. Nah,
Well, coverage to Florida
the
secondary.
fuck?
And you just
Come on,
watched that game
people.
yesterday, too. I think I checked
Oh
out a
my.
few minutes of the highlights. How do you throw into triple coverage like that and think the ball's not going to get tipped?
I mean, it's not like it's a Hail Mary situation, so I I know you're desperate, but man, you just couldn't hold it, could you?
I mean, in the sport of football over in Europe, there's a lot of criticism that these Gen Z kids do not play the same as the generation getting ready to
No,
retire,
they
which
do
is our
not.
generation. The
No, they
biggest
do not.
the biggest criticism in European football is that Gen Z players are too robotic. They have to be in a system. If you look at Brazil, for example, now with the new generation, nobody's got the Brazilian flair that they had in the past, where they could double dribble or just be entertaining football
Hmm.
players and have like an identity as a team. in Brazil, that was the Yogo Bonita that I remember watching, in the 2000s and the 1990s, where they could just be entertaining with the ball, and it was fun to watch. Now it's just like looking at the kids nowadays, it's too robotic. Everybody wants to play one type of, identity of football,
Yep,
just like with college now. It's like
it's
all these,
consolidation of what's successful and just
well,
duplicate.
not just that. They all the NFL and the NCAA have been literally playing spread offenses for the last 15 years. Just spread it out on the field.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, Patrick Mahomes is an awesome quarterback to watch, but how many times do I have to basically see, shotgun quarterback play, basically Texas Tech spread offense in the NFL? Like the system, like everybody has their own interpretation of it too, and it's just getting so boring and regurgitating to watch.
Oh, hey, they say if it's successful, repeat it.
So, since it is rivalry weekend, I think my biggest prediction this weekend is going to be Michigan beats Ohio State and makes Ryan Day go wah one more time. Now, if I'm wrong, I will admit that I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, let's hope.
And
Let's give Ryan Day a 4-peat loss and call it a day.
oh yeah. So we will be back next month when the rivalry weekend clears up, and we'll break down the bowl selection. We'll break down, the bowl season, the playoffs, predictions, and then whatever, went wild the last weekend. All right, it's been a fun episode. We'll see you guys very soon.
Have a good night, y'all.